Hey, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. You know, it pays to have friends who know that you collect photographs. Friend of mine dropped by today with a present, with a gift for me, and I have it right here to share with you. This lovely image appears to be a girl. I don't think she's quite a teenager, and she's got two younger children with her. My guess is we're looking at a family of three children here. And it occurred to me that for those of you who are new to collecting Civil War era photography, or if you are thinking about collecting, or if you're just curious about 19th century photography, this image is really a good one to talk about because it has a lot of characteristics that you would look for and that you would see if you were out at an antique shop or shopping on a website and came across these images wherever you were and found them. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about card photographs or cartes de visite, because they were originally known by that name coming in from France. The carte de visite, as you can see, is about the size of a modern baseball card. Back in the day, in the 19th century, and you would bring your visiting card, you would hand out your visiting card to folks, which would be usually engraved with your name. Well, around the time of the advent of photography, about 20 years in, the idea of putting these images on your visiting card, handing out your likeness to your friends, your family, became a fad. So, invented in France in 1854, really came to the United States and became popular around 1859, 1860, which is right on the cusp of the beginning of the American Civil War. So during the period of about 1861 to 1865, these little images skyrocketed in popularity. They became all the rage across the country, particularly in the northern states, because the photographers had chemicals and paper and they could offer these images for sale. In the South, as the blockade and the invading armies took their toll, photographic chemicals dried up and it was harder to make any kind of photograph, let alone card photographs. So these images, and this is a great example, as I mentioned, to talk about. And I'll tell you why. For one thing, is on the front, you can see that it has a double border around it. This border happens to be a red color, and I'll hold it a little bit closer so you can see. It's a red double-edged border. The outside is a little thicker than the inside, and the red is a little less common. Gold is typically the border, but there's no real standard. There were different kinds of borders, there were different colors. There was also no border at all, but the double border is pretty common. Again, look more for the gold than the red, but you get the idea. Now, the image itself, if you look closely, and let me see if I can catch it here in the right light. I'm not sure if I can. You'll see, oh, maybe there, you'll see a faint sheen, a little bit of a gloss that's coming off of the paper. So what we're looking at here, and you can see the yellow, the more yellow color, that's the actual paper, and it's called albumin paper for the egg whites that were an essential part of the composition. And this very thin piece of albumin paper, oh, there's the glare, there's the gloss right there, the glossy surface of it. That piece of albumin paper is mounted to a slightly thicker piece of cardstock. And so if you can imagine these images when they were first made, the color was eggplant, or a rich purplish, a deep purplish hue. And that color was deep and rich, and it had real dimension to it. So, for those of you who are familiar with tintypes or ambrotypes or daguerreotypes, and you know how rich the qualities of the developing chemicals that were used, the emulsion on tin or glass or silvered copper, these paper images rivaled those hard plate images, as we call them. But over time, the images began to fade. The paper images, these images began to fade, and that beautiful, deep, rich eggplant color turned into what you see here, which is the sepia. So, not many images in their original gorgeous eggplant tone are left. Most of them look like this. So it's hard to imagine that at one time they were much more deeper and richer in color. And they also had this glossy sheen on top. I'll see if I can get that back for you. That glossy sheen on top looks like oh, there it is. That glossy sheen that really accentuated the depth of it. So this is also a what we call a vignette. You can see the, in this case, a round feathered border around the edge of the photograph. This is a particular technique and a style that photographers offered. And if you can imagine, during any time in photo history, the photographers, think of them also, they're business people, and they're offering different styles to try to attract clientele to come into their gallery. Well, this is one of the styles, the vignette style. I should also mention that the corners here of the image are quite nice. They're barely dented, if at all. And this is a little bit unusual. Typically, you will find that these images have been clipped, the corners have been clipped, or the edges have been trimmed in some way. And that was because the owner was trying to fit it into an album, a photo album, and those photo albums had very rigid pages, and there were instructions in the photo albums to actually cut the photographs so that they could fit easily into the album pages without creasing the images as you tried to fit them in there. So this photograph either never went into an album, or the individual who put it into the album was able to slide it in without damaging it. So that's a mystery that we will never know the answer to. Now, I want to go to the back of the cardstock mount to show you what we have here. And again, these are some of the typical characteristics that you would see. Probably the most prominent, looking at the video, is the stamp. You can see the stamp right there, and I'll turn it for you so you can see it. This is an Internal Revenue Service stamp. It's blue. It's got George Washington. It's a 2-cent stamp. This was a tax that was levied by the federal government to pay for the war, and they appear on photographs from August of 1864 to August of 1866. They were wildly unpopular with photographs, and sort of, pardon me, wildly unpopular with photographers who, for a variety of reasons, including the expense, did not like to use them, and the public didn't like them either. But this one is hand canceled by the photographer. And if you look closely, and I better turn this so you can see it, it says WW on it. And the WW are the initials of the photographers, and we see their name here. It's Webster and Walker. And I'll put that up for you. And they're in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. And so the other characteristic to point out here is the photographer's imprint. So photographers like Webster and Walker would print up probably hundreds or thousands of these pieces of cardstock that were imprinted with their name and their address. And so it was an advertisement for folks who are shopping at this particular gallery. And that advertisement is a really helpful clue when you're trying to identify images. For example, we don't know who these three children are, but it's a good bet that they were either residents of Oshkosh or they were visiting someone in Oshkosh. and sat for this photograph in a local gallery. So it's a clue, and it can help us find out who they were. Anyway, these are the basic characteristics of a carte de visite photograph. I should also mention France called them cartes de visite. Great Britain called them the carte de visite. In America, they came to us as the carte de visite, but they became known as card photographs. And about 1866, they began to fade from popularity after the larger sized cabinet card, which was about roughly 6.5 by 4.5, something like that. The cabinet card is introduced in 1866. It eventually takes over the carte de visite or the card photograph in popularity. That really happens in the 1870s. And these little images, they stay around until 1880s, 1890s. There's even some examples up into the 1920s. So quite popular, an important little relic from the 19th century and 19th century photography. So that's my Photo 101 episode for this program. And we will see you soon on a new episode. Until then.